Hi, this is Kelly Bannon, host of Today's Country with Kelly Bannon on Apple Music Radio. You're listening to the Your Morning Coffee podcast with my friends Jay Gilbert and Mike Etchart. Weekly music news for the new music business.
From Spotify for Artists, fans study a deep dive on catalog.
From The Guardian, the work we do isn't algorithmic. A&R in the era of TikTok.
From Media, what happens when the relentless toll of the music industry meets the creator economy in a cost of living crisis?
And from Peter Sinclair, the CEO and co-founder at Beat Bread, what we've learned after nearly 500 artist advances. Independence is cool. Control is even cooler. All right, Jay. We have talked before we hit the record button for more than an hour.
Yeah.
And yet here we are going to actually hit the record button, or that we've already hit the record button. So let's do this. It's episode 112. Yes, episode 112 of the Your Morning Coffee podcast. Jay and I are here. We are ready. So join us as we start the show right about now.
Stand by for transmission.
This is London calling.
Wake up! The revolution is at hand!
Your morning coffee is on the air. 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 Standing by. Your morning coffee, the weekly music news for the new music business. It's the highly curated, agitated, advocated, moderated, and liberated digital music information that you need to know. We are your digital music authority. And now from our studios in Hollywood, California, here's your hosts, Jay Gilbert and Mike Etchart.
Jay, good to see you, brother. We had to go Ghost in the Machine this morning. We could not figure out why you couldn't, or I couldn't hear you. And over the years, we've learned so much about how to do this remotely.
Right.
And I'm always struck by sometimes it's the weirdest thing. Here we were, you were tearing apart your system. And what ended up happening was my iPad on my side, I just rebooted it and that fixed everything.
Yeah. Ghost in the Machine.
It's so weird. Weird. But
Yeah.
what a lovely, lovely introduction we had.
Oh, yeah. Special shout out to Kelly Bannon from Apple Music Radio for that really cool intro. Kelly is a CMA Award finalist for Broadcast Personality of the Year. And this is the first time that that's happened from somebody from a DSP platform.
Yeah, sweet. Kelly launched Apple Music Radio's first country show, Today's Country Radio, with Kelly Bannon in 2019. Her show is now the most listened to show on Apple Music Country.
Yeah, she's interviewed stars like Dolly Parton, Carrie Underwood, Luke Combs, Maren Morris, Miranda Lambert, Luke Bryan, Jason Aldean, holy cow, and many, many others.
Yeah, and she was also included in Billboard's 2022 Country Power Players list. So big congratulations. Good luck, Kelly. We appreciate you giving us a little recording like that.
And I don't know if you're aware of just how great, Apple Music Radio is. People are always talking about playlists, but, I grew up on radio. I grew up on, personalities, and Apple Music Radio, just this coming week, just a few highlights. Zane Lowe show, if you know Zane Lowe, he's got an amazing show. On Tuesday, there's the Essential album, 25 years of Janet Jackson's Velvet Rope with Dottie. I'm looking forward to that. Also, Countrywide Radio with Morgan Evans. That's celebrating Latin Heritage Month. And on Thursday is Kelly's show, the Kelly Bannon Show, and she's got Mickey Guyton on. And I'm a huge fan of Mickey Guyton. I had the pleasure of meeting her, thanks to Cameo Carlson. I love her music, and she's such a great person. And then a couple others, Apple Music Hits. There's a show coming, Rock Classics Radio with Jen, and they're going to cover the Cranberries. So don't miss that. That's this coming Friday. And then the last one I want to just highlight is the Nashville Countdown with Dierks Bentley. So this episode celebrates the 25th anniversary of Keith Urban's Golden Road. Oh, and one last one, Southern Craft Radio. This is coming a week from this Sunday. Anyway, it's Southern Craft Radio with Joy Williams. I'm a big fan of Joy Williams. I was visiting a friend of mine at Apple in Nashville, and I just happened to mention that I was a big fan of hers, and I loved her cover of Ordinary World, and you might remember her as kind of the half of Civil Wars.
God, I love that band.
Yeah, and anyway, he said, "Oh, you like her? Well, that's her right there." And she was walking by, so I totally did the Chris Farley, fanboy thing, and we went over, and I got to say hi to Joy Williams. So listen to that show. Anyway, Apple Radio, some really great stuff.
Amazing stuff. And this is the first ever for the podcast survey, right? We have not done a survey before.
No, we haven't. And I'm glad you brought that up because this is going to be going out this coming week. So it wasn't in your morning coffee that came out last Friday. But your morning coffee readers of the newsletter are going to get a survey this week. And it's from our friends over at Media. And it's about the future of streaming services. So we're going to put a link in the show notes. But if you just fill out this survey, and it's really quick, it's really easy, you get a free copy of their Future of Music report. That report is a $9,000 report. Media does these amazing reports for the music industry, and this is one of them. And not only do you get that report, but you also get entered for a chance to win $1,000. So
it's fantastic.
Check out that link in the show notes. Please fill out that survey. And if you subscribe to the newsletter, which I hope you do, there'll also be a link in that. That's going to go out about the same time as this podcast on Monday. So, yeah, thanks for mentioning that. We haven't done a survey before, and we're big fans of Media. In fact, we're covering one of their stories today.
Yes, we are. And their reports are, well, you'll see it. And like you said, boy, they are... when you're a record label, it's not a big deal. But when you're an individual spending money for a report like that, it's a very big deal. And the fact to get that for free is pretty ridiculously cool.
They're the best.
Yes, absolutely. And we talked about this last week, but there's also that new documentary on the band Chicago called The Last Band on Stage, which is going to be on Apple TV now.
It just came out. Came out this last Friday.
Thank God, I got to check that out. I love music documentaries. We
love
music documentaries.
We'll have to watch that. I've only seen the trailer, which is on Chicago's website, and I'm really looking forward to seeing that because it's directed by Peter Pardini, who did that really great Chicago documentary in 2017.
And we should mention Behind the Setlist podcast because that is your other podcast or one of your other podcasts. But you've also got Lee. How do you pronounce Lee's last name? Loughnane. I always said Loughnane. I always used to say he's the trumpet player, right?
Yeah, he plays horns, and we interviewed him and the director, and thank you for that. That came out this last week. Just an amazing interview with Lee from Chicago.
Well, and those guys, God, you can't overemphasize how influential as a band they've been and how long they've been together. I mean, we're talking half a century, right? If not more.
Yeah.
And it's to have that success and to keep plugging along and those different phases of their success. It's just unreal. And they're still playing.
Yeah, they're still doing it, and they sound amazing live. So thanks for mentioning that.
A bunch of times.
Can't wait to see that documentary, and we'll let people know what we think of it.
Exactly. By the way, the guy that I get to hang out with every week and the hour before we even hit the record button is none other than Jay Gilbert. He and I have been buddies for so long. He is the co-founder of label and artist services company Label Logic. He's the curator of the weekly Your Morning Coffee newsletter, which brought us all together for this podcast. And he's a former executive with Universal Music, Sony Music, Warner Music Groups, and Fox Home Entertainment.
Thank you, brother. And this guy sitting across from me, Mike Etchart, a fantastic human being, longtime host of Sound and Vision Radio, formerly of SST Records, Warner Music, Capital EMI, and Universal Music, a left-handed musician and a staunch advocate for spatial audio.
Yes, indeed. And we're overdue for another trip to the studio, aren't we, to listen to some more spatial mixes.
Yeah, we need to get back up there. So Your Morning Coffee, let's thank our wonderful, amazing, supportive sponsors. The Your Morning Coffee podcast is brought to you by our friends at Bandzoogle, built by musicians for musicians. Bandzoogle is an all-in-one platform that makes it super easy to build a beautiful website and EPK for your music. All the features that you need for a professional website are already built in, like hosting and a custom domain name, that's easy for you to say, dozens of fully customizable design templates, tools to help you sell your music and your merch commission-free crowdfunding and fan subscription features, mailing list tools to grow your fan list and to help send newsletters, very important, social media integrations, and live support from their musician-friendly team 7 days a week. Your Morning Coffee podcast listeners can go to bandzoogle.com, try it for free for 30 days. Just use the promo code Morning Coffee, all one word, and that'll get you 15% off your first year of any subscription. That's bandzoogle.com, promo code Morning Coffee.
And we are also sponsored by Hypebot. Since 2004, Hypebot has chronicled the new music industry and the trends and technologies that are changing how music is discovered, consumed, marketed, and monetized. It is edited daily by founder Bruce Houghton with help from Alana Bonilla. Hypebot and sister blog Music Think Tank are published by live music discovery and marketing platform Bands in Town. Yes, Bands in Town, the first app I ever got on my phone. Over 65 million live music fans trust Bands in Town to get personalized concert alerts, recommendations, and messages from their favorite artists. It's the #1 artist service platform, connecting over 550,000 artists with their super fans. Managers, labels, agencies, and artists access their own dashboard to manage and promote their tour dates across all platforms. So big thanks to Bandzoogle, Hypebot, and Bands in Town.
Yes, sir.
Jay and I stand on the shoulders of giants.
Yes, we do. We appreciate it.
And after that
so
meal
much.
I had last night, I know I'm a little heavier than I usually should be. So sorry about that, guys. Well, Jay, what do you say we jump into our first story from Spotify for Artists? It's a fan study, a deep dive on catalog.
Yeah.
And like all these things we talk about, Jay, it is absolutely beautifully laid out. And
easy on the eyes.
Easy on the eyes. Man,
Yeah,
they do a
sure
great
is.
job with these reports and things.
Yeah.
It's fascinating. But again, we've talked about catalogs so much, and we, of course, both you and I were in catalog departments for labels, and so we have a near and dear passion for catalog.
Absolutely. Always will. And it's a major part of the business. It's a majority of the business. A couple of fun facts. These Spotify fan studies, they come out quarterly. The last one was about how to grow your global fan base. And this one takes a closer look at catalog. And it's super important that you look at catalog because it's a majority of the business. And I love that they've kind of done this deep dive with all the data that they have. And I'll take the first one, which is old tracks can learn new tricks. I like that. There are catalog tracks appearing on Spotify's global weekly top songs chart, right? And more catalog tracks have been charting on Spotify than ever before. Now, of course, there's some obvious things, like Kate Bush running up that hill and things like that. But there's some things that aren't so obvious. Since 2020, the portion of Spotify's global weekly top songs chart, represented by catalog, has increased by, get this, 155%. So as of this year, almost a third of the charting songs are catalog.
It's remarkable. And again, this is just starting in 2022. They're talking about back in 2022 was 13%. In 2021, 23%. And then, as you said, in 2022, it's 33%. So it's pretty amazing. And I think, in our day in labels, the catalog group was kind of, it was like the sync, the film and TV people. They were there, we were there, but it was kind of off to the side, and the numbers people recognized the value of those, but a lot of the frontline labels, there wasn't such a huge focus, and that really started, probably in the 90s as in the CD, with CDs and all of the reissues and everything.
Right.
But it just has continued more and more and more, and when we're seeing that big of a span in such a short amount of time, it's pretty remarkable.
And you'll remember when one of the pioneers in that space was Rhino.
Yes.
And Gary Stewart and all those great folks over at Rhino. They really took catalog to a different level, and then that spawned catalog groups. Now, look, there were catalog groups at all the other majors, but
sure.
I think the emphasis changed, and I got to work with UME, Universal Music Enterprises, and the team over there, which was absolutely amazing for almost 5 years. And there's definitely a lot to learn about marketing and selling catalog. And
yes.
I can tell you that today it's taken very seriously.
Yes, absolutely. The next number 2 here is your catalog and your merch go hand in hand. So that relationship between catalog sales and your merch. And as they say, when it comes to selling new merch, it's important to think beyond the new release. Of fans that bought merch on Spotify in 2022, 88% streamed catalog of the artist they purchased from, compared to only 67% that streamed frontline tracks, which is very interesting.
They're more devoted fans, it sounds like.
Yeah,
they're buying the merch. And you remember we reported on, the partnership of Shopify with Spotify, and now you can set up your merch store right there when people are listening to your music. They can buy the merch. And this is interesting. It sounds like these folks that are listening to catalog music are more apt to put down their credit card to buy some merch.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So number 3 talks about sync. And this has been a big deal lately. And again, everybody talks about Kate Bush and Running Up That Hill just because it's been so massive. According to Spotify, it had a 439% catalog lift, right? That doesn't surprise anybody. So the headline was, "One Big Sync gives you the chance to turn viewers into your fans." May sound pedantic to some people, but when you land a sync, Spotify sees that there's a huge jump in brand new listeners. Spotify partnered with Netflix to analyze a set of syncs and saw artist discoveries jump between 50% and 6,000%. But it doesn't stop there. The rest of your catalog gets a boost too. And some of the syncs that they mentioned besides the Kate Bush was Lizzo, Truth Hurts. That sync, it was in Someone Great on Netflix. And that was a 271% lift. So they have a whole bunch of these that they had, shared their data on with Netflix. And to no surprise, it really boosted the streams on them.
No, I was looking at that list, and there's a something on Netflix called Malcolm and Marie, but it mentions a song by William Bell, "I Forgot to Be Your Lover," which is an old Stax tune, which is just like, oh my God, I love that song. After I read this list, I went back and looked at it and listened to it again. I'm like, what a great tune. And again, it's classic music or catalog music can just set the stage so well, whether it's time-based, like a particular era, or it's just the mood. It's just amazing when you're cutting video and you drop in a song, or even just cutting audio.
Yeah.
It just changes everything. It's remarkable how music can frame something when it comes to audio or video.
And if you watch Stranger Things, especially that episode around Running Up That Hill, it was part of the plot line. It wasn't just background music. And the thing I like about Stranger Things is they're not just a one-trick pony. By featuring Master of Puppets by Metallica, that had a huge increase for them as well.
Yeah, absolutely. The point number 4 is when your song goes viral anywhere, Spotify is where fans come to hear more. If you play it right, one track's viral moment can lead to long-term fans. After artists have their first song go viral, we see a 70% increase in streams for the rest of their music, excluding the viral song.
Interesting.
So, yeah, very interesting how that all works. And again, it's got beautiful charts, and you can it's got little things that falling. It's
Yeah.
Somebody spends a lot of time on these
Yeah.
fan studies. And
Well, I hadn't
and
thought
good on
about,
them.
how having a killer sync could, or a viral song, that would also kind of bleed over and bring in long-term fans. And it makes sense. But you think of it as music today, people they don't have an attention span. So, sometimes these moments are just that, they're moments. So number 5 is when fans lean in, they lean more towards catalog. So you look at the listener playlist streams, they're 75% catalog. If you looked at the liked songs, when somebody clicks to like a song, almost 75% of that is catalog. And then when you look at people who go to an artist profile and stream on Spotify, 64% of that is catalog. So fans that are actively seeking out and streaming your music, they love the older stuff. In fact, almost 3/4 of active streams from places like listener playlists, album pages, artist profile, like songs, almost 3/4 of those are catalog.
Yeah, I love the next one, number 6. Nostalgia has no age limit. The older I get, I'm appreciative of that. It says younger listeners dig the oldies. For listeners under 25, over the past 4 years, their portion of total streams represented by music from the 80s has increased by 45%. And
I
it's
love
funny.
that the 80s is oldies. You feeling a little older today, Mike?
God. Yes. So this is basically tracks between 80 and 89, and it's stunning how interesting and how it touches an age group like that around 25, which is both of our kids' age group as well.
Yeah.
And a buddy of mine who I play in another band with, he's got a long-serving 80s band that plays around Southern California. And he said he's noticed that lately, that it's a lot of kids that basically have just gotten they've just turned 21. And so they're coming to the bars and they want to dance to 80s music. And these guys are killing it. They're making a lot of money.
Yeah, I don't know why that surprised me so much, because my focus group of 4 kids around that age, just throughout their growing up, they would come home and, Dad, have you heard of this band called Queen? Or they'd be wearing their Ramones shirt, and no, they were always into catalog, because they would hear it, on YouTube. That was their DSP of choice growing up, was YouTube, because they could find everything, and I subscribed to multiple DSPs, so they had their choice. But they really loved building their playlists in YouTube. And yeah, I don't know. I think that's encouraging that listeners under 25 are, because that's the lifeblood of our industry. I think that's really great.
Absolutely. So really wonderful, again, a wonderful fan study, and like everything Spotify does, boy, they really put a lot of heart and love into it, and just some interesting data points. And I love reading these things and looking at their fantastic presentations.
Yeah, absolutely.
Check it out.
Good stuff.
Check it out. Yes, indeed. Our next story, Jay, it is from The Guardian. The work we do isn't algorithmic.
Did you see who wrote this?
I did.
It's Eamon Ford, who I've spoken with, and he wrote this really great book that I'm holding up right now that nobody can see, but you can. He wrote this amazing book called Leaving the Building, The Lucrative Afterlife of Music Estates. And it really kind of shows you how the sausage is made behind, these big estates. When a popular artist passes away and maybe their family takes over the business, there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes, and this book, I highly recommend it. It's really a great read. But Eamon's written a lot of different things that we've covered on this podcast, and this one, as you mentioned, is from The Guardian, and that headline really grabbed me. The work we do isn't algorithmic. A&R in the era of TikTok. And I had the pleasure this week of sitting down with Giant Records with their A&R team. That's one of Irving Azoff's companies. And, we were just talking about data, and these guys are so smart, and they're just amazing. And we just had the greatest conversation about data. And if I can do a shameless plug, I'm moderating a panel on A&R and data. at the Music Tectonics Conference. It's coming up on October 26th is my panel, but the conference is in Santa Monica, October 25th through 27th. I highly recommend that conference. There's so much to learn. There's so much networking to do. It's absolutely an amazing conference, but I wanted to bring that up because we're talking about some of the things that are in this article. Fantastic article by Eamon.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and this is, we should mention that this is a reboot of the Giant label that Irving started back in the 90s, where I worked actually, and that was distributed by Warner Brothers Records at the time. And nice to see him jumping back in with that name, because I remember at the time he spent a lot of money to get that name. There was another independent label called Giant Records.
Oh, there was?
Yes, there was. That he...
Interesting.
He flashed some moolah, and they gave it up.
Yeah, well, it's not about the money. It's about the money. No,
Thank you very much
I
for
was
bringing
really
that up.
impressed with the team down there for a lot of reasons. They do a lot of different things there, and one of the things is acquiring select catalogs. But what I love about them is they don't just acquire a catalog and then look at the percentages that are projected each year going forward. They have people on staff to actually take care of all aspects of that. And that's very similar to some of the things that my company does. So I really appreciate when people take catalog, there's that word again, seriously. So Eamon points out that A&R reps, and for those that don't know, that's artists and repertoire, right? A&R are the wildcatters of the music business, spotting new acts, signing them, and guiding their artistic development. That's a part that people often miss. The essence of what they do hasn't fundamentally changed in over a century, but the way they do it has shifted significantly, and we'll go into that a little bit. He starts with this story that I'm just going to touch on a little bit to kind of set the stage for the conversation. The president of Warner Records in the UK, Joe Kentish, he signed acts like Dua Lipa and Griff. He says the early days of A&R took place in an analog world where he might be tipped off at 4 o'clock in the afternoon to see an act locally that night that he had never heard of. So he'd scramble to arrive in time to beat his competitors. And, but today he says that some networks of managers, lawyers, venue owners, and other artists provide solid leads, but there are more resources at hand, from SoundCloud to social media to help A&R reps discover new music. And you and I touched on a friend of mine that does A&R. I asked him, with all this data, what are you looking at to sign acts? Are you just looking for things that are popping, on TikTok? And he said, no, a lot of those haven't played a live show yet. I need something that's a little bit more, they have their base kind of started, and they've got a little experience playing live. They're not young kids that have never done anything before. And he said the number one thing he looks for is a line out the door around the block to see them play.
Still, exactly. By the way, I also want to mention that in case you don't know, A&R is really an old phrase from an older era. It stands for artist and repertoire, at a time when an A&R person would sign an artist, and this was before artists were expected to write their own music.
Right.
That A&R person would interface with publishing companies and bring songs to the artist, and that was really the skill of what an A&R guy did. Of course, now we kiddingly say that A&R stands for artists and restaurants, because you're always taking out artists to kind of wheel and deal in. But as I said, kind of to your point, in a business dominated by streaming and social media, turnover of music is fast and furious. The article says there's far more of it to sift through in search of gold. On the video sharing platform TikTok, tracks and sounds bubble up constantly and can cause an A&R stampede if they are generating views and shares. But 30 seconds of virality does not make a career.
Okay. I took that line out and I wrote it down on a separate piece of paper. I'm stealing that line. Thank you, Eamon.
Yes.
One more time. 30 seconds of virality does not make a career.
No, exactly. And then so they talked to Dipesh Parmar, I believe, who's the president of the Sony subsidiary Ministry of Sound Records. And he said the industry can get very excited about something going viral, but it's not necessarily the sound that's going viral. It's the content. And the music is secondary. let's replay that again.
Yeah.
He said it's not necessarily the sound that's going viral, it's the content, and the music is secondary. And then he said that's where you've got to use your gut and listen to the music. That's where A&R is key. Yeah, good point. Absolutely good point. And I also want to mention and tap back to the great book we read on Warner Brothers Records and talked about after the passing of Mo Austin. And you look at
Sonic Boom.
Sonic Boom, and you look at kind of the way they did things, and they were such a music-based company and patient, and you've got to fall in love with the music, and it's so easy to get distracted with all of the things that are happening now in the marketplace in terms of social media and things like that, because it's easy to get fired up when you see big numbers.
Yeah.
But are you falling for the music? That's the question.
Yeah, and you always say, does it make you laugh? Does it make you cry? That sort of thing. They talked to Jeff Bell. He's the VP head of UK for Partisan Records. And, they said that, A&R reps will publicly at least argue that short-term successes just set the bombs under long-term prospects. And, according to Jeff Bell, today the divide between A&R departments and marketing departments has diminished. Part of the signing process is being able to identify audiences and potential audiences, Jeff says. That is a core function of the marketing team here. It's not just that the lines are blurred, they're essentially part of the same team.
Yeah, interesting. One of the things he mentioned too, talking about Jeff Bell at Partisans, also said things are moving at hyper speed today, which is a really great way of kind of thinking about it. He said that creates new challenges for the industry. Culture moves quicker than any business model can keep up with, he says, but it's certainly not algorithmic in the work we do. But that is also really, to me, paints a really accurate picture of the challenges, which is, everything is moving so quickly, and how do you get a company to, it's the big ship in the Suez Canal that's moving very slowly to start to take advantage of all of those things that are happening at hyperspeed in the marketplace. And that's a challenge. That's a real challenge.
That's a great point. And it's also about so many other things. A&Rs, and you just sign a band and they're famous and you're done. There's so much work. You have to be that cheerleader in the building, that evangelist that gets the other departments fired up about your signing. Eamon points out that A&R is inherently about the shock of the new, but the true alchemy here is trying to ensure that the buzz translates into long-term success. That's key, right? Budgets can be extended and nerves can be held, but only for so long before bowing to the inevitable, and dropping an act, that is simply not working. How do you cut through the noise? That's the key point here. How do, with the sheer volume of tracks that are released today, how do you rise, above the noise? And there's another piece in your morning coffee. We're not going to go into it this week, but I highly encourage you to listen to The Verge. Their podcast is called Vergecast. And the headline this week fits so perfectly with what Eamon's talking about. It says, "It's never been easier to be an artist or harder to be a star."
Yeah, absolutely. I like the last line too. It says, it mentions someone saying that A&R anticipates, at their best, A&R anticipates what the market can handle rather than cater to what the market already likes.
Nice.
It's not about tailoring artists to fit the mainstream. It's about working with artists that can drag the mainstream to them and change culture.
Ooh.
Like, wow, there's a bunch of stuff I need to write down from this article.
Great piece. Eamon.
Yeah, it really is.
Fantastic.
Yeah, great things to think about. And it used to be much easier to be patient, right? There are far fewer releases.
Oh, yeah.
And there wasn't the public company pressure for profits. And, a lot of this, we talked about catalog earlier. A lot of this catalog was developed at a time when labels could afford to be more patient.
Yes, artist development. Like some of these artists, some of my favorite artists, didn't hit right away. Look at Cheap Trick. They had patience to wait through, these, Cheap Trick, In Color, Heaven Tonight, and at working their way up to when they kind of popped on Budokan and Dream Police and et cetera. But you can say that about so many different bands, that because the label was patient and they would get to this. Now they have this great catalog, at Warner
Yes.
Music, Universal, etc. And you would never have that if you just dropped somebody after the first focus track didn't perform.
Exactly. The example I always use is Pink Floyd Dark Side of the Moon, one of the biggest selling albums of all time. I believe that was their 7th release, or if not their 6th release. And that's just remarkable that EMI, the label at the time, stuck with them that long.
Yeah.
And they lost their lead singer after the first album, and it's like you would have dropped that band now, and yet that catalog is one of the most valuable in music. And it took them a long time to get to those points where those albums were the blockbusters they were. So
Right,
really
and
wonderful.
some records don't ever have big numbers, but they're very influential and bring people in. And it was funny, we were talking about that with the giant marketing and A&R team, and they kind of had the same example that I use, which is Sonic Youth. They got signed to DGC Records when it was new. And one of the reasons for that is they were highly influential with other bands. And the reason that Nirvana signed with DGC was because they wanted to be on the label that Sonic Youth was on. So it can't all just be about that viral hit, that big sync, that TikTok moment. There's got to be some artist development in there too. But fantastic piece by Eamon Ford. Thank you,
Yes,
Eamon.
indeed. Amen. Indeed. Excellent article. The next one from Media. What happens when the relentless toll of the music industry meets the creator economy in a cost of living crisis? I love, again, a lot of these great descriptors about kind of the new music business and this sort of relentless toll and just the speed that everything is happening. So let's
and this
pull
was
that one
written
up.
by Hannah Collart. And again, you and I are such huge fans of Mark Mulligan and Keith Jopling and all the people over there at Media. They just put out the best research in the business, and once in a while they'll pop these articles out to kind of talk about certain subjects, and they're just the best. And Hannah points out that the music industry today is kind of in a cultural crisis. It's more demanding than ever, right, to be successful. And with the work required to meet the demands of social algorithms and to cut through the clutter and, being more competitive than ever, in addition to touring, being huge, it was hit hugely by the pandemic. And now cost of living is horrendous, and the ability to attend real life concerts is still challenging. So after remuneration, there's that word again, on streaming has been broken for a while, and NFTs have failed to kind of step up and fill that gap. Creators who are making a living by being artists are finding it harder than ever to make ends meet. It's really tough out there. There's been some articles lately about touring and how expensive it is and how hard it is to find a bus. Billboard did some really interesting stories about just the cost now associated with trying to be on the road. It's really hard to even break even.
It is, absolutely. Hannah mentions in stark contrast, and we've talked about this a lot, it has never been easier to become a music creator. The availability of software, sounds, hardware, and instruments at affordable entry-level prices has made it imminently accessible to reach a high stage of quality without much time or financial investments. And we've talked about this a lot. In our day of starting to play music, you and me, Jay, what you wanted to do was get a record label. You wanted to have your records in the record store next to your favorite fans. Well, guess what? That's now the way it is, and the floodgates have opened.
Yeah, that's not hard anymore.
Not that hard anymore. As I mentioned, social platforms like TikTok have made it possible to compete on the same airwaves as the superstars, and anyone with an interest can now make a little bit of revenue on the side by uploading their work to a platform of choice and finding a niche fan base.
But I have to ask the question, what is success? Because we did that panel at Americana Fest with some artist managers, and that was one of the key questions there, because very few artists see success as the same. Some people just want this experiential thing where they just want to do it. Like you and I did when we were younger. We just wanted to do it. It was fun. I don't think we put a lot of thought into what kind of publishing revenue we could make or sync licenses or any of that stuff. It was really like, I just loved playing shows with some fun talented musicians, and we had a lot of fun with it. But success today to some people it's their social footprint. It might be the streaming numbers that they get. It could be the cap rooms that they're playing. There's so many different accolades. There's so many different measures of success, but it comes back to that Verge headline. It's never been easier to be an artist or harder to be a star. And Hannah points out this interview with Trent Reznor recently that revealed that artists, he has his qualms about the ready availability of things like synthesizers and other equipment. He said that with all these tools available, every synth in the world available to anybody essentially for free, you'd think that maybe music might be more interesting or experimental or exciting or branch off in new places. But it doesn't seem to be happening. And it reminds me of a conversation I was having with Roger Joseph Manning Jr., who is a friend and a client. He's recently, played keyboards for Beck, amongst, many other bands like Jellyfish, etc. Anyway, when he was younger growing up, he collected these keyboards, and they had different sounds and, the Moog synthesizer and all these different things. And he was telling me that today, and you know more about this as a keyboardist, kind of explain to me how people can basically buy these sounds for their digital keyboard without having to buy 180 different keyboards. They can just buy the software, right?
Yep, you can buy software collections or emulations, and you used to, especially as a kid growing up playing in bands and being a keyboard player, synthesizers for the most part were unobtainium. They were unbelievably expensive.
Were they?
Unbelievably expensive. Oh, a mini Moog, one of the classic synthesizers was about $2,000 in
and
like
what kind of year was this? Like what era?
Like 77 or so.
Oh my gosh, that kind of money back then? That's like that's what a car cost.
Exactly, that's what it was. Yeah, it was like a car payment. And if you're in high school, it's like, who can afford stuff like that? And so, and I think he brings up a great point, which is it's just so cheap to get all that stuff now, or to get emulations. You can get a fantastic mini Moog app on your iPad that sounds unbelievably great, and it's like $9. It's unbelievably cheap. But like Trent says, you would think with all these tools, but it's also almost overwhelming, all of the, and we've talked about this too, when in the old days you had to make decisions and stick with those decisions. Now, because you had a limited number of tracks, you had a limited number of instruments you could buy. Now, just the sky is wide open, but it's too many choices. And I think, like Trent says, we're not necessarily making better music now because all the tools are available and cheap.
Yeah.
It's there's nobody's really, there's are people that are pushing the envelope, but you would expect more, I suppose, is the best way of saying it.
Yeah, I was talking to a friend of mine about this, and he was saying that a great song is a great song. And if you can strip it down and just sit down at a piano and have somebody sing and you play the song and it's still melodic and it still holds together, or an acoustic guitar or something like that, he said that's kind of how he looks at some of these great songs, because all the great songs you can do that with.
Yes.
And with this kid in the candy store mentality of you have unlimited choices of loops and beats and synth sounds and all of this, I think it can get in the way of just focusing on the great song. It's still a meritocracy. It's still all about great songs. The other stuff is kind of, frosting.
Absolutely. But of course, so we've got all of that stuff. As she says, now enter, of course, a cost of living crisis. North American and European markets will be facing sky-high heating bills this winter, while many developing markets continue to face the flooding, fires, and heat waves of the climate crisis. What's going on in Ukraine? There's just so many things that are happening, and it plays a huge role in people's ability to cope. How can they afford? How can they afford it, basically? And that's why coming up in the coming months, they're going to lay the groundwork for an entirely new creative heyday, maybe. But it's such challenging times right now. And like you said, I just paid $6.50 a gallon gas. We're the most expensive right now in SoCal.
Yeah. If
you're going to try to do a station wagon tour and go just up and down the coast in California, that right there will probably eliminate
everything is more
possibility of doing that.
expensive, right?
Yes.
And even vinyl, because it's, made from petroleum products, is, besides the lead times, it's super expensive. And Trent Reznor's complaint is that nowadays it's a great time for cool creative types to be making these things, and for the public to have access to all of this, relatively cheap. But he said, I think we need to try to not overcorrect and over deploy the tools that can become lifeless, a sterile sound, or too perfect. And I noticed that with an album I was listening to lately where the harmonies were too perfect. So it almost sounded like an organ. And the beauty of music, at least for me, is the imperfections. When I was growing up, I had a live album collection. I would buy live albums for any artist I could find because I loved the contrast, the differences between the live and the studio album. I didn't learn until many, many years later that a lot of artists go back in and take those live tapes and do overdubs and fix mistakes and things like that. But I just love live albums. I had one of my clients recently send me a board tape from a tour that just ended because I love those slight imperfections where you might be a little flat or the harmonies aren't exactly perfect, because that's that human element that just, I just love it.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And you hear variations of the song or variations of the guitar solo when you hear live versions, and it is magical without a doubt. And that's we've seen it from the other side of the glass as well. When you're in the studio and there's a flat note or a little imperfection, you're like, oh, that's all I'm going to hear now. That's like you just listen to the track. That's the only thing you hear. I got to fix that. But you're right. I think you can fix out the soul of a song by over perfecting it.
Yeah.
And with the tools now, it's so easy to go in there and just, if you've ever seen the way the pitch correction works, it's just like a little line and you just push it up a little bit. Oop, there we go. That's in tune.
Yeah.
But again, you're taking away the soul of it. And you listen to like some of it talked about cataloging, some of the classic catalog albums. You put a metronome up to it and it speeds up and slows down. It's not perfect. It's not in a grid.
Yeah.
But it's specialer. It's more special, I should say.
That's easy for you to say. No, I agree with you 100%. And the last line sort of sums things up. Hannah did such a great job on this article. New sounds will emerge and find their groove, spin, character, and audience. Creativity thrives on limitation, and the industry is about to face the reckoning this period will offer in that regard. And I got to tell you, nobody knows the future, but these predictions from media, most of the time they're right.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So great piece. Media, Hannah Collart, fantastic job.
Yes, indeed. And our last article, Jay, from Peter Sinclair, the CEO and co-founder at Beat Bread, what we've learned after nearly 500 artist advances. Independence is cool. Control is even cooler. And Beat Bread is such an interesting company. They're basically... There's sort of like this weird thing between a label and not but they're giving advances.
Well, it's kind of, think of it as like a loan, and they're not taking your master. Basically, they'll pay up to 8 times your annual streaming income. And that's the reason why catalogs are selling, is this predictability that streaming has afforded us.
Brought to the industry.
Right. So if you have history on your music, Beat Bread is willing to give you an advance, like I said, up to 8 times your annual streaming. You keep 100% ownership of all your recordings, publishing, touring, merch, sync, all of that, right? They're basically looking and saying, okay, you're going to be generating this kind of revenue over the next few years. We're going to loan you this much money, and we're going to take a small percentage of that. And what that does is it gives you the freedom and puts you in charge. It's a lot of what my company does at Label Logic is now you're not beholden to a label who maybe will own your master and maybe you'll get a royalty. And I do need to say this. We've said this before, but it's really important. we've worked for labels. We're not label bashers. Labels will throw gasoline on your fire with their global network of relationships and smart people, and they can blow things up, and we've seen it for decades. I'm not one of those guys that says, oh, you don't need a label ever. But for some people, some new and developing artists especially, you can fund these things yourself with platforms like BeatBread. And I read this thing that Peter Sinclair, their CEO and co-founder, wrote. I found it on LinkedIn, and I thought it was really interesting that because they have funded, hundreds of projects, here's some things that they've learned.
Yeah, exactly. And he said, what we got right, well, he talks about what we got right from the beginning. He said, there are massive numbers of artists who can make a living from their recorded music, more than many understand.
Yeah.
He said 5 or 6 years ago, only about 5,000 artists globally made more than $50,000 per year on their recorded music. Now that number is 5 to 7 times as high and will be more than 10 times as high in a few years. He says, we've seen artists ranked outside the top 2,000 globally making more than $100,000 per month in streaming.
Wow.
Artists outside the top 30,000 making over $5,000 per month, and artists outside the top 100,000 in the global chart metric and Spotify rankings making over $1,500 per month in recurring streaming payments.
Yeah, and if you read the press, the music press, you hear a lot about the economics of streaming and how you really don't make a lot of revenue as a developing or middle-class artist from sales streams and downloads, which are still a thing some places. And I love that they pointed out some examples of some success stories there for those artists. He also mentions that artists can grow very fast without being signed. He says all it takes is a good content, a plan, and a little resource. We've funded hundreds of artists who have grown their fan bases to significant levels, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, or even millions of monthly listeners. And this has happened before ever getting involved with a label. And you and I talked about this on the A&R side. Labels, put aside the TikTok viral moments, labels want to see that you have your stuff together, that you've played live, you've done some touring, that you've sold some merch, that you have a fan base that's active and trending positively, so they can throw some gasoline on your fire, not start and try to go from 0 to 60. As he points out, many of them have doubled or tripled their fan bases within a year, and leveraging BeatBread's funding, with the talent for marketing and content creation they already possess within their own team. So we're seeing that a lot lately, where artists and managers are becoming their own team, their own label. And I would argue that this has been going on for decades, but is becoming more popular. Managers like Howard Kaufman and Irving Azoff were pioneers in managers that took over some of the roles of labels and distributors even. And someone like Jonathan Daniel over at Crush, he doesn't wait for anyone. I mean, he told me this. He doesn't wait for anyone to do these things. He does it. He takes the control and the responsibility for himself. But he was the one that told me early on that a label, you can't count on them to do everything, right? They're very good at what they do, but their core competency is really throwing gasoline on your fire, meaning that if you have some momentum, they can take you to another level.
Right. And that's remember the subtitle of his article is "Control is Even Cooler." And I've told the story of an artist that got signed at the same time, a very popular artist that was signed at the same time that Alanis Morissette's record came out. And in that particular scenario, all of the attention and all of the marketing dollars went to Alanis Morissette, as their releases were very similar in time-wise. And that's something out of your control as an artist. And so we talk about control, how important that is, and that's the downside of working with a label is, there's several releases and they're looking for the one that's going to bring in the most profit, and a lot of attention will go to a different release than you. So, that can happen within a label structure. And that's, again, where we're talking about independently, you have much more control. As he mentioned in this, there's a few things that surprise them along the way. And he said, artists aren't romantic about, in quotation marks, independence. They are ruthlessly pragmatic. A tiny number of artists' desire to remain independent reflects deeply held values and a sense of personal renegade identity. He said, still, most artists and management teams who want to stay independent rationally weigh a label deal's economic and strategic costs against the flexibility and increased upside potential of remaining independent. In hindsight, he said, this seems obvious, but it's easy for anyone, including us, to get hung up on the mythical stereotype of the independent artist who makes their decisions on philosophical, anti-corporate, and purely creative grounds.
Yeah,
so
I
he's
thought
saying,
that was really, really
yeah,
well said.
there are some people like that, but there's a lot who just kind of look at the facts and say, this way over here makes more sense.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of indie artists now that would like to continue to be independent for that control that we're talking about, creative control and decision control. But one of the other things that he said surprised them along the way is that too many artists lose a great deal of control and ownership without ever signing a label deal. And this was the most surprising and arguably the most disappointing revelation in their first 2 years of existence. So far too often, they would see a promising artist that was successfully growing their fan base with great content. I hate that word, but I get it. Hard work and their own marketing efforts, but they signed an arrangement with a distributor, right, or other middleman who not only takes a large share, sometimes as much as 30 or 50% of an artist's economics, but also locks them into a captive marketing or distribution arrangement, right? So I think you have to be careful as an independent artist. One of the first hires that we recommend is a music industry attorney, even before a manager, to help you set the stage for your career and your goals. Because it's not just the, evil, major labels, there are some bad actors out there on the distribution side and even on the publishing side that'll take more than their fair share, and they prey on new developing artists.
Right. And if you're an artist, it's also, we talk a lot about how hard it is to be an artist now, because you kind of have to wear so many different hats. But one of the hats you do need to do, as Jay had mentioned, is at least educate yourself on some of the deals that are out there. If the Don Passman book is a must purchase, everything you need to know about the music business. And what edition is he on now?
10.
10, edition number 10.
That's the best one. We rave about it because it covers all the newer digital stuff.
Exactly.
All of his books are good, but you're absolutely right. It's a must. It's a must have.
It's a must have. So I think anybody that's contemplating any sort of a deal to at least educate yourself. It'll cost you the cost of the book, and that is money well spent. One of the things they also, which was interesting, that they also learned is more artists can retain control, ownership, and flexibility inside a major label deal than they had imagined. He said, some artists who have taken funding from us have used it to grow their fan bases, increase their leverage, and then sign a short-term limited works deal. A few songs are up to a whole album's worth with a major label under terms that include a healthy economic share, ownership of their catalog, and critically, freedom to quickly flip independent on their next project.
Yep.
So again, having that flexibility, and the deals have changed because there's much more competition. Absolutely.
Yeah, and we've reported on that, how these label deals are evolving and changing, and a lot of it favors the independent artist. So listen, I highly recommend that you check out Beat Bread. There are other platforms that do this. I've heard really great things about Beat Bread, and great piece by Peter Sinclair, their CEO and co-founder.
Yes, and boy, all of these new sort of angles from the old music business are just fascinating, and it's great to keep learning about them as we try to do. And on that note, Jay, we must wrap up episode number 112 of the podcast. I know it goes so fast. So thanks to everyone for listening in today. Boy, Jay and I certainly appreciate it. We hope you have a wonderful week, and Jay and I will be back next time on the Your Morning Coffee podcast.
You've been listening to Your Morning Coffee, the weekly music news program for the new music business. Join Jay Gilbert and Mike Etchart next time for the digital music news you need to know.